In today's video, we will discuss the concept of key squares. In endings with a single pawn and king versus king, a key square is a square whose occupation by our king ensures victory. We will firstly demonstrate the key squares of pawns without kings on the board to aid our visualization. In this first example, we see a white pawn on the b4 square. The key squares of any non-rook's pawn, so that's A or H pawns, when they are located at or before the fourth rank, is the square two squares in front of it and both squares either side of that, as we can see highlighted here. That is to say, in order to ensure the pawn's promotion, we must occupy any of these three squares with our king. In this next example, we see a pawn on the d5 square. This retains the key squares of pawns on the second, third or fourth ranks, but also gains the square immediately in front of it and both squares either side of it. Finally, we consider the case of rook's pawns. These are a special case. Due to the nature of the constraints of the board itself, we are unable to force the enemy king to concede ground, as we'll see in a moment. Occupying the square that is two in front of our pawn also is not decisive, because the defender can box in the attacker. Therefore, only the occupation of the two squares next to the corner will assure us of a win, this being guaranteed to prevent the enemy king from reaching the corner and also avoid our own king being trapped on the edge. A further point worth noting is that these key squares do not change no matter where the pawn starts. Let's now show how this works in practice, how the occupation of key squares translates to a win, and how it is impossible to force promotion without them. In this first example, the white pawn on d4 means that the critical squares are c6, d6 and e6. White is currently not occupying any of these, and thus, if it is his move, he is not winning, as we can see by this sequence. King e5, and black prevents white from being able to access either the d6 or the e6 square with the move king e7, the only drawing move, as you can see from the table base, and whatever white does, black can follow and prevent the occupation of any of these three squares. However, if it were black to move in this position, you can see that he would have to give up control over one of the key squares, and white would be able to occupy the one that's no longer being controlled and win. This position is in fact our first example of reciprocal Zugzwang, a concept we'll discuss in more detail later. In this example, all that has changed from the previous position is that everything has shifted one square up the board. This means white is winning, regardless of who is to move, as he occupies the key square d6. White to move simply goes to either c6 or e6, and the pawn goes through. King e6, if king e8, then d6, and the black king is forced to give up the defense of the c7 square, and thus white promotes the pawn and wins, hopefully. For knight pawns, as we can see here with the pawn on b5, the winning strategy requires a little more precision. Playing king c6 here would prolong the win, but not throw it away. Black can make use of the stalemate motif by hiding in the corner, as we can see here. After king c6, king a7, and if white tries to go in king c7 and king a8, the move b6 would take away all of the black king's potential squares, so white would have to return to the original position by playing king b6, king b8, and then hopefully find the correct move king a6 when he can simply promote the pawn as normal. If you want a hard and fast rule that will work in all scenarios, regardless of pawn location, it is to go to the side that is nearest to the edge of the board. Now we again turn to the rook's pawns. In this first example, it can be seen that despite white occupying the square 2 in front of his own pawn, there will be no way to evict black from the corner, and the game must be drawn. This is the most surefire method of defence in this scenario against a rook's pawn, to head to the corner. If that is achieved, nothing else matters. However, in the second example, white has prevented black from reaching the corner and thus has secured the path to promotion. White wins regardless of whose move it is. In this final example, white has occupied a square 2 in front of the pawn, but neither of the 2 key squares. Black simply prevents white from reaching b7 or b8, and black has no way out because it is illegal to move off the board. As we can see here, if a6, black simply continues to prevent king b7 or king b8 with the move king c8, and if king a8, then king c7 continues to fulfill that role of stopping white from getting out, and with the move king c8, black will achieve stalemate and a draw. If after king c8 white has played king b6, then black could respond with king b8, getting to the corner, and he can simply shuffle backwards and forwards until white gives up and accedes to the draw. Thank you for joining me for this discussion of key squares. If you have questions on this topic, feel free to ask them in the comments below. Please leave a like if you enjoyed, and please join me next time as we begin to delve into corresponding squares. Goodbye for now.